Hey there, and welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast, the show where we're all about helping you feel confident both as a mom and a business owner. I'm your host, Kendra Swalls, mom of two, former teacher, and full-time photographer and business coach. Each week, we'll discuss the challenges, success, and secrets that make you say, I can do this, because you absolutely can. So pop in those earbuds, grab your favorite snack, and let's get ready, because this girl means business. Hey friend, and welcome back to the Girl Means Business podcast. This week we have a really fun interview episode with Kara Haynes. She is a photographer. She is a podcast host. She hosts the Cameras and Coffee podcast, which I have been on recently. I will link down to her podcast. So if you want to go listen to my episode on her podcast, you can go do that. But we are going to be talking today all about communication. Specifically client communication and client experience, but the communication piece goes across the board, whether you are talking about with clients, with collaborations with other business owners, with your employees, if you have anybody on your team, even your own family and friends. Communication is key in all areas of our life. So Kara is going to be talking today about her experiences and her knowledge when it comes to creating a client experience. And it all comes back to having really strong, good communication. So I cannot wait for you to hear our conversation. Kara is an amazing photographer, an amazing educator, and she has so much knowledge to share. So let's get right to it. Kara, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited to chat. Okay, I think we have a really fun, exciting topic. But before we get to our topic today, tell us a little bit about yourself, your business, your journey to get to where you are now.
Sure. So I am a wedding and senior photographer, and I'm based in West Michigan, so near Grand Rapids. I live in a suburb out of there. But I have been doing this. My son is going to be 16, so almost 16 years.
Wow.
Started as a hobby, kind of went into a business, but really honed in. It wasn't until like 2017, so it's been a little while, 7 years. Really gung-ho, doing it full time, kind of going there. But yeah, there's just been a lot of experience along the way. I actually have an early childhood degree, which is kind of funny. I used to do a lot of family photography, so a lot of kid type of things, and just realized I like control. So
Yep.
Senior photography and couples are a lot easier now. The chaos of a wedding day really is where I strive. Like I thrive in those environments just because I'm so used to the busy classroom of preschoolers and like communication. I've done a lot of parent meetings and things like that. So I really kind of found my craft and found my niche there of what I love doing. So yeah.
Well, we have a lot in common there. I came from the teaching world as well. And so when you find that point where the two things that you are good at and you enjoy like merge, you're like, oh, now I see where I can use all of this knowledge I had from the classroom and teaching and apply it just in a different way, wrangling 4-year-olds versus a wedding party of crazy or family members. It all fits together.
Sometimes
I can't tell you
the same.
I can't tell you how many times I have used like the 1, 2, 3 eyes on me when I'm like trying to get like people's attention, or I'll be like, clap once if you can hear me. All the same strategies. I've used those in weddings because I'm like, guys, it's the same thing.
Oh my gosh. I love it.
That's so it's interesting to me how many people come from educational backgrounds. I've interviewed so many people on the podcast, or even just like people I've talked to at conferences or things I've gone to where they're like, oh yeah, I used to be a teacher. And I'm like, oh, we all like come from the same thing. It's kind of funny. So yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that when you're a teacher, you're not just teaching.
Yeah.
Like you're wearing so many hats and you're multitasking at the same thing, which I think is why, and I feel like teachers are driven, like they're very much like, and forward thinkers. You have to be. And so I think that's why we strive in business so well, is because we're thinking ahead, we're thinking of now, we're doing multiple things at once. It just makes sense.
Pivot really easily from one thing to another. Like we're just constantly like bouncing around. Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And I think another piece, like what we're going to talk about today, comes a lot from that too, which is the idea of communication. because
Mhm.
it's very, I don't want to say it's too different, but I think it is very different coming from like a corporate world to a
Mm.
world of like, you've had to deal not only with the children in front of you in the classroom and learning how to communicate things to them in different ways, but then you have
Yeah.
the parents, and then you have your administration. Like you have all these different things, these groups you're having to make
Mhm.
sure everybody's on the same page. And I think that translates a lot into business, because you now have to make sure that you're able to communicate with your clients, or maybe even multiple. If you're working with weddings, you may be having to communicate with the bride and the mother of the bride. And then on the day of, communicate with a planner or coordinator or venue owner, or whatever it might be. You're still having to juggle all of those different things. So I think
Yes.
this is a topic that is really relevant, especially coming from, what we used to do versus what we do now.
Yeah.
Again, it's all the same, just in a different format.
Well, it's crazy too, because when you think about communication, like when you've been a teacher, you have to communicate to the child, you have to communicate to the parent, you have to
Mm-hmm.
communicate to whoever's above you,
Yeah, exactly.
and when you have volunteers, you got to figure out how to communicate to them. There's so many avenues and so many ways where you have to like bring things in layman's terms and things where you're like, okay, this is super educational moment in a process. Yeah,
Yeah.
it all
Yeah.
it all goes into play.
It does. It does. Okay. So let's dive into that, because this is something I've talked about on the podcast sort of in passing in other episodes.
Mm,
It's always been kind of embedded in like a larger conversation, but I love that we're going to really solely focus on communication today, because I do
yeah,
think it is so important, and it can make or break your client experience
for sure.
when you have really good communication versus really poor communication. And I will say I've
Hmm.
seen both sides of the conversation, where I've seen business owners who have said things like, oh, I get so frustrated because my clients didn't see this in the email I sent, or they didn't read this in their
Hmm.
contract. On the flip side, I have seen it, and I've been, kind of on this side too of my own of being a client, and being kind of frustrated with someone who was like not communicating well. And I was like, I have all these questions that are not being answered. So I really think you're going to give us a lot of insight today on how to avoid that, both as
Hmm.
the business owner and helping our clients feel really well and taken care of. So let's say if you are a small business owner, and we can use photography a lot for this, since that's both the world that we know, and a lot of my listeners are photographers as well. What would you say is one of the like first things you would say is the most important when it comes to communicating with your clients?
Yeah, definitely over communicating. And that is something I am really big on. And sometimes I'm like, is that too many things? But definitely like when you are unsure, or you have a client that's asking a lot of questions, just constantly saying the same thing over and over. And I think there's like studies out there, don't quote me on it, but where you have to hear things like 7 times before you actually make a change or
Yeah.
actually consider it. And I think when you over communicate what points you're trying to bring across or things they really need to know, then you can say like, hey, here's where we talked about this. Let me know if you have additional questions or things like that. Because I think a lot of times we just assume.
Yeah. Oh
We
yeah.
assume that they're in our worlds, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
we see it all the time, but you got to think of it from an outward perspective and for in our case, a non-photographer perspective of would I know this if I
Yeah.
wasn't a photographer? And I think that's key
That is
for sure.
huge. And I want to like kind of expound on that for a second, because I do think that's something that a lot of times gets lost, is that
Mm,
we get lost in like the forest of what we do. We forget like that saying of like, you don't see the forest for the trees. And I think that it's so helpful in this case to maybe even take what you use for your communication, whether it's, an email series or your welcome guide or whatever it is that you send out. Maybe send it to somebody that is not in your industry, not in your niche, and
for
say, does
sure.
this make sense? Because and I say this a lot, I just was talking to somebody who does like web design and websites. And I always call it the mom
Hmm.
test of when I'm like creating
Yeah,
my website
me
or working,
too.
I always send it to somebody and I'm like, okay, go look at this and tell me if it makes sense. And I think that we forget to do that with our communication piece. We look at it as like, oh, when someone comes to my website, does it make sense? But what about what happens even beyond that? Does it make sense? Are we covering all the
Hmm.
bases? Because I do think that is something, because I've experienced this as a client of like, oh no, I don't understand your world. I don't understand this process. I don't know what comes first, second, third, fourth. You need to break it down for me like I'm a kindergartner. And I think we forget to do that because we don't want to insult our clients, but we also forget they're not in our brains. They don't live in our world, like you said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I even think of like when we were going to record this podcast, I'm like, did she send me a link of where we're meeting? And then when I got to my email, I'm like, there it is. I don't have to go digging through my email. So like, it's stuff like that where, let's say you have, as a photographer, you have a photo session and you sent out a link a while back, like, here's where we're meeting, here's the time. Like, is that the only time you're going to communicate that? Or are you going to do it again, maybe a week before and then the day before? And kind of explaining like, what's your cancellation plan? What's the plan if this happened? Like kind of, there's like education in that as well. And I think that's so important because a lot of times we have so much on our mind, we don't think about it till the moment comes. So
well, I want to back up for a second because I think before we get into even like the nitty gritty of once someone has reached out to you or is working with you, what about communicating to them before they ever reach out to you? Like, what are some things we can do? I know you mentioned the big thing is like over communicate. And I think a lot about, you know, our websites, the content we put out on social media. How can we apply that idea of over communicate in our content that draws people into wanting to work with us before they ever become a client?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you've been listening to the Girl Means Business podcast for any amount of time, then you know my love of email marketing runs deep. Not only is it a great way to generate new leads, but it's one of the most effective methods for nurturing warm leads and turning them into sales. Now, over the years, I've tested several email platforms, and my favorite by far is Flowdesk. Not only do they make email marketing simple and easy, even for the technically challenged, but they have everything you need to create stunning emails, capture leads, make sales, and automate the entire process, giving you time back in your busy day. And the cherry on top is you're only charged one flat fee no matter how many subscribers you have. So while other platforms will increase your price when you go over your pricing tier limit, Flowdesk has no price increases or hidden fees. If you're ready to give Flowdesk a try, click the link below in the show notes to save 50% off your first year. Let Flowdesk help you design emails people will love. Click the link below and check it out. I have a feeling you're going to love it just as much as I do.
Yeah. I mean, if you post something on social media one time, you can't imagine like they're going to look at it, you know, continually talking about it. Like you can post multiple things on that. You can do blog posts that are multiple blog posts that are the same thing, you know, like it could be a different like perspective, but it can definitely be in that. But I also think like, for us photographers, a lot of times we'll have guides to talk through, but like specifically like my website and websites that any business professional should talk about like their process of what's the process if you want to get in touch with me. And it shouldn't be in one spot. You should have it like a link to go to it from multiple places. It's the same if you were to post on social media or put it in an email list or something like that. Don't assume like you did it one time that they're always going to know where to go find it. Like constantly talk about it.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing because I have always had the mindset of like, I want my audience to feel super supported from the moment they hear about my business to the moment, like even beyond working with me. And so sometimes that means giving information up front. Like there's a lot of people I think who gatekeep and who are like, oh, well, once they reach out to me, I'll give them all the information. They're not going to reach out to you though, if they don't have some of the information up front. And so finding a good balance of like, okay, I'm going to put this into a blog, but I think and this is my own little soapbox I'm gonna get on. Blogs are not dead. Like blogs are still really relevant. Like make sure you're putting content out there that is a resource for your audience that draws them in and makes them feel like, oh, this person understands how to take care of me as a client. So I think that's super important.
For sure.
Okay.
Well, and I think too, as businesses, like you need and it doesn't have to specifically be this, but like frequently asked questions.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, we as Americans, we want to know right up front, what's the damage,
Yeah.
when we have a service. And
Yep.
so just having that all communicated up front as well is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this again, another like tangent we could go off on, but I'm a big believer in, like you said, putting as much information out there as you can. And I
Mhm.
think that for me, that means putting out at least a starting price point, because that could be a
Yeah.
return. And there's a lot of, I just had a conversation with a lady on social media the other day. I'm like, there's a lot of people who are not going to reach out to you to find out your pricing because they feel like, and this comes from past experiences probably, they feel like they're going to get either bullied or guilted into working with you, even if they're out of your price point, because now they've entered your sphere of like sucking you in. If you can just put their mind at ease and go, this is the starting price point. If this matches your budget, let's talk more. Some people put their full pricing out there. I think that's totally fine too. Finding that balance of like, what do you feel comfortable with, but also like putting enough out in the front facing that
Yeah.
they feel comfortable enough coming to you and asking the questions.
Well, and I feel like there's been this thing of if you don't put your pricing or information on once they contact you, you're just going to spam them all this stuff. And I mean, yes, as business owners, we want to have as many funnels as possible, but what are we doing so that they don't have that fear? So, yeah, for sure, communicating as much as possible so they don't feel like they have to get into that funnel.
Yeah,
The never
exactly.
ending funnel of how do I get rid of this stage 5 cleaner?
Right. Yes. And we don't want to, I mean, we want them to come in and be excited to talk with us and not have that
Yes.
fear of, oh, they're just going to like guilt me into this.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's say we have enough information up front that makes them feel comfortable to fill out our contact form or send us an email or however it is they get in touch with you, set up a call. How can we then, once they have said, yes, I want to work with you. Yes, I want to book with you or whatever the process is. What's the next step? I know you said over communicate, but what does that really look like behind the scenes when
Yeah.
someone is actually becoming our client?
Yeah, for sure. Um, Definitely checking in often or explaining when you will next check in is super important because let's say for photography reasons, I have a wedding client. They book me like 8 months out. They're not going to hear from me again unless they're booking an engagement session or until like maybe a month before the wedding. And they're going to be like, I paid this person this much money and are
Yeah.
they still around? So they're just going to wonder. So I think it's really important to say, hey, I'm going to go radio silent until this date. This is when you'll hear from me next is huge. But I also think like when you want to nurture that client or someone that's entering your business and convert it over, I think it's really good to get them into some kind of CRM. So I think it's important unless you're really good at keeping things organized on your own, whether it be spreadsheets or in your mind, and checking in via email. That I'm not that kind of person. I need a CRM to help me out and send automated emails so that these clients feel nurtured.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to constantly communicate and assure them that you have their best interest and that you haven't gone anywhere. You're still thinking of them. And yeah,
Yeah.
this is how it's
Sadly,
going to go.
there's been too many stories of, especially in the wedding industry, there's been too many stories of photographers or even I've seen some with like venues where there is no communication. Like you said, there is that large window. If they book you 8 months, sometimes a year in advance, and you do go radio silent because you're not, you don't necessarily need to check in with them every couple of weeks when you have that big gap in between.
Yeah.
But there's been too many stories of, brides that have been left stranded on a wedding day because the photographer never showed up or the videographer or the venue, whatever, went out of business. And it's intimidating for clients who are booking in advance to feel confident in that decision when they don't
Yeah.
have the communication ahead of time of like, hey, just a heads up, you probably aren't going to hear from me for a couple of months because this is like the window of time when we're really going to communicate hard and heavy. But that window beforehand, you may not hear from me, and that's okay. Don't worry. I'm still here, or I love the idea of, like you said, the automations, the CRMs, like having maybe some automated emails that do go out every month or so that just say, hey, just touching base, hope that your wedding planning is going well. Asking a question or something like that, just to make them feel reassured. I think that's the big piece, is that constant communication adds that level of reassurance that, yes, I'm not just taking your money and running. Yes, I am here to really serve you. And unfortunately, we have to give them that assurance, because there have been others that have gone before us that have ruined that for us.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it is so true. And I think it's so important to really add those key elements. And a lot of times you can educate your clients along the way. And I think that only makes you seem more of the expert in what, and like gives them assurance that they chose the right person. When you can give them your professional opinions, doesn't mean they have to take them, but like share some of your experiences so that they can kind of know before maybe they work with you or during the process of working with you, no matter what your business is, for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned the CRM piece. I know that's really important. I know you are big on Dubsado. I'm a HoneyBook person, but there's like so many other ones out there. I think just find the one that works for you, for your what your industry is. And you mentioned kind of in passing the automation piece. That has been huge, because like you said, I'm not someone either who, like, I'm horrible at keeping up with things. I need it to either be written down or scheduled for me. And so the CRM piece, which is client management system for anyone who's not sure what a CRM is, but it's so helpful. They give us so many tools now to allow us to stay in contact with our clients and to set these little like benchmarks along the way. Do you have any tips for what setting that up, or what, like, even some of the things you should include maybe in your automations of that would be, if someone's like, I don't really know where to even begin, like, what should I be communicating out? How often? What kind of reminders should I be setting up? Do you have any tips on any of that?
For sure. So I use workflows. So, and a lot of it, honestly, is for myself. I use primarily, like, my CRM is for me. Now, I have the benefit of adding stuff for my clients in there as well. So I have it like broken into like little stages where I have like, kind of like their initial inquiry, their onboarding, their booked, type of thing. And then once we've worked together, and then what another big one is like their offboarding is kind of how you can nurture them after that. But some key elements in there, like I said before, is basically once they're booked, telling them like when they're going to hear from you again. Some things in there of things that maybe you have things you need them to do. I think it's important to have a CRM because you're not having to go in and constantly check. Sometimes you can set that up to have like a form, and they can answer your questions in that form. And if they haven't, it can constantly remind them over time, like, hey, this is still not filled out. Can you fill this out? I need it by such and such date, that kind of thing. And honestly, I can do more business stuff instead of having to remember to send them reminders, which is kind of odd to think about. For sure. And then a big thing for in the photography world is communicating not only like a contract, like having a contract, which when talking about communication, no matter what you're doing, contracts are huge because it sets the expectation. It is a binding agreement between the two of you. And it also talks about like what to expect and what they need to know. But that doesn't always mean they read it. And so a lot of times communicating that along the way, like, hey, in your contract, it says this, da, 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 just want to remind you. And I get that, especially after I've done my service. So if I've photographed a wedding, if I've done a photo shoot, just communicating the day of, sending a thank you, and then basically stating like, hey, according to the contract, you will get your gallery in this amount of days. I'll send you a sneak peek in however many hours, however many days, just so you know. And then you won't hear from me again until this. Is super important.
I think that's so smart, because I'll admit this, I don't read through every portion of the contracts I sign for things sometimes. I mean, like, a lot of times it's written in a way that just feels a little bit like overwhelming, or, legal jargon. You're like, oh, okay, fine. I agree. Sign it. And we sometimes forget that our clients are probably doing a lot of that too. And so I
Yeah.
love the idea of kind of reiterating some of those pieces, like, okay, this is how long before you'll, your galleries, however many weeks or days or whatever per the contract. I think that's really key there, is putting in there that per the contract that you signed, because sometimes we want to remind them like, you
Mhm.
did agree to this. I also think it's really smart what you mentioned about the offboarding piece. I think we think a lot about
Yeah.
client communication as prior to them booking with us, and then once they've booked with us leading up to, the project. But then, yeah, there's so much more that happens afterwards. We don't want to just
Oh, for sure.
abandon them, like they're going to feel like, well, okay, I guess we're done here. Like, she's forgotten about
Mhm.
me now. I think there's a lot of communication that can have to happen afterwards. Like you mentioned, the timeline of when they're going to get their images or when they'll receive whatever, deliverables from you. But then I also like to add in the piece of, that's when I ask them to leave me a review,
Yeah,
or,
for sure.
to refer me to their friends. And I think those are communication pieces too that we don't want to leave off, because those can be really valuable as well.
Of course. And I do have a type of funnel of offboarding where it will, especially when it comes to photography. I know this is very specific to photography. Um, it can be done in your CRM, but I have a email funnel that they get into once they've looked at their gallery, so that not only is the client being communicated to, but anyone who's been in their gallery
Oh, that's
then
smart.
gets email automation, and it says like, hey, this is like where you can print or whatever. Also, it'll say like how to tag me in it so that I
Mm,
can have my name out there for my business associated, appropriate tagging, appropriate use for the images. But then also like continually to nurture them along the way, even though I'm not doing anything, it's just something I set up about things for the future of what
yeah.
to do. And reviews is a huge part of that. And that's how I can get additional reviews from more than my clients. Let's say from a wedding day, a guest just thought I was going above and
So
beyond.
smart.
They can go on there and leave a review and they know
Yeah.
how. So yeah, for sure.
That is genius. Yeah, I hadn't thought about like the not just the couple or the client, but like anyone else that was involved in that
Mhm.
project. And something else you said here, which kind of light bulb moment, was, the idea of, I see a lot of people that come in or like the post in different industry groups. They're like, oh, I'm so frustrated that this person didn't tag me in this photo, or this
Oh
person
yeah.
didn't leave me a review. And my thought is always, but did you ask them to? Or did you show them
Mhm.
how? Because a lot of times it's just not something that we think about. Like, I think of how many times
Mhm.
I've gone to dinner. I did this recently. I went to dinner for a friend's birthday, and we tried this new super cute little restaurant that just popped up, and they had like, it was just very girly, and they had these really fun
Mhm.
drinks, and they like all this decor and like little photo op areas. And we took tons of pictures and we posted them on Instagram. We put them on our Facebook, but I don't know that I ever went in and actually tagged the location,
Oh
because
yeah.
it just didn't occur to me. I wasn't thinking, how can I help promote this business? I was thinking how
Mhm.
excited I was to show off this fun girls' night that we had. And our clients are the same way. They're going to, post their pictures, they're going to post a review, they're going to talk about their experience or whatever, but they may not always think to tag us because it's just not top of mind for them. And that's okay.
Oh
We
yeah.
shouldn't fault them for that. But
Right.
there is a, I guess, say, what I'm looking for here. There is a responsibility that we have to educate them on
Mm.
how they can tag us or ways they can help share our information. And that should be part of your client communication, because then you won't have the frustration of, oh, they didn't do it because you didn't tell them how. It could be, if you're still
Yeah.
can still be frustrated, that's totally fine. But at least you've done your work, you've done your due diligence to give them all the information and resources they need in order to promote you and tag you and all those things.
And I think there's right ways to communicate that even then when they don't realize it. And I think a lot of times I've seen where there's like these very passive aggressive posts where they're like, please tag your vendor in blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, first of all, that should be a private conversation
Mhm.
because you don't want to come across like, yeah, we're mad, but like, you don't want to come across as the vendor that
Yeah, it
is
like,
the
puts everybody on
angry vendor.
blast.
And second, it's probably just straight up ignorance. So
Mhm.
just privately message them if they post it on Instagram or on Facebook and say, "Hey, do you mind tagging us in this? That really helps me get more clients in the future. It shares my work, blah blah
Yeah.
blah." I think it's appropriate to come out of it as always assuming they're innocent until proven guilty in those
Yep.
moments where you're like, it's probably just them not knowing. Um, and again, in my galleries, I always put like a top banner bar that says like when posting images, please tag, and it tells them appropriately. Cause even so, like I'll get people tagging my personal accounts and I'm like, please
Oh
don't do
yeah.
that. Please tag my business account because then they have to
Yeah.
go through and search all these funnels. And then the people that I interact with, let's say on Facebook, this is mostly where this is an issue,
Uh-huh.
are like, oh my gosh, enough, Kara, with your photography. We get it. You're a photographer. Like, I'm like, I don't know if they really feel that way. I feel
Right.
like I am
Yeah.
coming across that way. So it's important to say this is the appropriate funnel where I want you to lead people. But yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And again, it just comes down to sharing that information and you can
Mhm.
share that in various points of your, communication with them. But again, making sure that they understand. And I've seen people too, where they'll go in and comment under, let's say, Susie posts her photos from her wedding day and doesn't tag you. I think it's good, like you said, to go have a one-on-one conversation, just say, hey, I'm so excited. I love that you're sharing your images. I love that you love them that much. I would really appreciate if you would tag, or I would love for you to tag
Mhm.
me so that this is how I get more exposure, blah, blah, blah. But I also think it's okay as a vendor to go in and comment as your business, say like, we loved being part of your day. It was so much
Oh yeah.
fun, and that's another way that, like, if you are someone who doesn't enjoy confrontation or doesn't want to have that conversation, that is
Yeah.
a very, way to kind of go in there and say like, okay, this is who I am. And this is, I was part of her day, without having the passive aggressiveness of what you said before, of like going in and being like, oh, I hate when people don't tag me, or please do this, or please do that.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to have that conversation with their clients. That's totally fine. There are other ways to do it in a way that is very kind and gentle, and not
Yeah.
necessarily the passive aggressive or rude post that you put out on
And
social media.
I'll be honest, that is my first step is I always comment, and it's funny, like days later I'll find that they end up tagging
Mm-hmm.
me and they'll like edit the post and I'm like, it's just because they're not thinking of it.
Yes.
And
Again,
honestly,
yeah.
it doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
Like, I have all these other funnels and whatnot. If it's something I'm super proud of and it's like something that really can gain me exposure, yeah, I'm gonna reach out right away. But
Yeah.
when it's just, you know,
Yeah. Well, and I think that we forget sometimes too, that, let's say, we'll go with the wedding theory again, is like, you have a bride that you loved working with. Her photos were beautiful. The wedding day was stunning. It was at a venue you would love to do more of. Like, and yeah, she puts that out there, and she forgets to tag you, and she forgets to tag the florist and the venue and
Mhm.
the Kate, all the things. But we don't realize too that a lot of her friends might be coming saying, "Ooh, who was your photographer? I loved your photos." And she may be having these conversations that's not
Oh yeah.
necessarily on social media. And that's okay too. Like,
Mhm.
I think we put so much pressure on ourselves that, like, oh, it has to be put out for the whole world to see, when really, like,
Yeah.
the most valuable piece of this isn't that she tagged us or didn't tag us. It's that she's having conversations with other people who are saying, or she's sharing her experience. And I have said this a million times, the experience that your clients are going to talk about isn't just what they get in the matter of like the day that they work with you, or
Oh, for
in the
sure.
final product. It is all that communication that we talked about leading up to this point. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, she was amazing because she, answered every question I had. She, made sure I was aware of X, Y, and Z, or she made me feel comfortable leading up to, I knew exactly what to expect going into our project together.
Mhm.
Those are the things that are going to make that, for that client, talk about you. And it may not be online, it may not be in a review, it may just be in conversations with her family and friends, but that's totally fine. I would almost prefer
Yeah.
that, because then at least I know it's, she's talking about an experience I feel proud of as well.
Yeah. And it's more authentic
Yes.
than trying to say, this is my photographer, this is who I've worked
Yes.
with. And that works for multiple
Yeah.
businesses, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing I want to touch on that we haven't talked about yet are frequently asked questions. So this
Mhm.
is something I think is really, you kind of glossed over it earlier when you were talking about things to put out or put on social media or in your blogs. But I find that this can be a really powerful tool for communication prior to them working with you, as well as communication leading
For
up
sure.
to. So what are some tips you have for us as far as sharing these frequently asked questions? Like, how many or how deep should you really go in this? Where should you be putting these throughout the client communication process?
Yeah, I think first of all, start thinking of what are you getting asked all the time? Like that's really where you're going to get your frequently asked questions. Um, I noticed, especially with weddings, it was very interesting because it was like everyone must have like this wedding planner guide because they were starting to ask the questions in the exact same order.
Thank
And
you,
I was like,
Canva. I'm sure it's all
that's
based on
really interesting.
Canva.
Who knows? Um, and so I was like, oh, let me just answer these questions up front. Or I will, in a meeting with them, talk about these like things, even though they haven't officially asked me them, because they might not know they should be asking these questions. And I want them to walk away with, oh, she answered that for me.
Well, and
But
that's one thing I want to pause you right there, because I think that that
yeah.
is something that leads into, again, that client experience
Hmm.
is being able to answer the questions they don't even know to ask. Because I can't tell you how many
Yeah.
times when I was shooting weddings, I would go into a meeting with a bride and or even a couple, and they'd be like, I'd be like, "Do you have any more questions?" They'd be like, I don't really know." And I'm like, "Okay, well, here are some of the questions that, or here are some of the topics that other brides or other couples have asked that might be
Hmm.
important to your day," and that shows them that not only am I like a good photographer, like skill wise, but I also can anticipate the needs they're going to have,
For sure.
and I'm now the expert. I'm not just someone with a camera taking pictures. I'm now the expert that can guide them. And I think that that piece of the frequently asked questions, of being able to anticipate what they're going to need or not even know that they need answers to, is really important.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, photographers, are you ready to make 2024 your best year yet? Growing a business is tough. You're following all the successful photographers and experts, soaking up their best advice and downloading all their free guides, trying to replicate their success only to come up lacking, blaming yourself when their methods don't work for you. But the truth is, it isn't you. Free content and one-size-fits-all courses can only get you so far. What you need is personalized help and guidance, but that can get expensive. Well, not anymore. I've created the perfect solution to get you personalized results for less than $2 a day. Introducing the Focus Photographer Lab, a one-of-a-kind coaching membership that gets you one-on-one results for a fraction of the cost of traditional coaching. Inside the lab, you'll find the 3 C's to success: classes, coaching, and community. With classes, you gain access to a treasure trove of pre-recorded trainings and invaluable resources. With coaching, you get monthly live trainings and Q&A sessions, along with my favorite part, the weekly one-on-one office hours, where we get to address your unique questions and challenges. And then there's the community, where you get to connect with an amazing group of talented female photographers who share your passion, supporting each other and inspiring each other to greatness. The best part is it doesn't come with an expensive one-on-one coaching price tag. You get all of that for just $47 a month. You can even try it for free for 14 days to make sure it's a good fit for you. And there is no contract and no obligation. You can cancel at any time. So what are you waiting for? Head down to the show notes and click the link to learn more and get signed up today. And let's make 2024 our best year yet.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have that on your website as well, because that's definitely something they need to get to. But something that I don't think people think of often is an automated email responder. So let's say you get so many emails, or you have like an initial inquiry from a client. Those are the places that your frequently asked questions should be right in the beginning. Whether you have to answer them again or not is no big deal. But if you're getting an email, chances are they're asking a question that is already answered in those frequently asked questions.
Yeah.
So putting them in there, not only on your website, but there as well, is super important to have. And I know I've had friends where they're like, oh my gosh, these are this person keeps asking me this, and then another parent was asking me this. And I said, take that as a moment of reflection. Have you answered that question anywhere?
Yeah.
Because if you're getting asked that a lot, it means that you aren't nurturing them enough to let them know, like, this is what you do for that. And stand your ground. Like, don't bend over backwards if it's something that you want communicated and what you do and how you do your service. Like, have that there. Um, yeah, it's definitely something that should be in more than one place again,
I think that's
with
really good
entry.
because a lot of times, like you mentioned that, oh, these people keep asking me the same question. That's not on them. That's on us. It's
Mhm.
definitely a moment for us to go, oh yeah, I need to do better at communicating that in some place or some form. And so before you get kind of annoyed by it, go, okay, what can I do to prevent this from, and you're still going to get people to ask you the question because they don't read it on the
Yeah,
side or they don't look at it, and that's fine. But if the majority of your clients are going, oh, what time am I supposed to be there? Oh, how long until I get my pictures back? Or how long until this happens? Then that's a question that
yeah.
needs to be addressed in some point of your communication.
Yeah, and I find now, like, for me, it's usually the people that are not in direct contact of what that is. I just had a mom the other day, like, her and I have communication. She's actually the one that suggested that a bride book me, her daughter, and literally the day after, she's like, "Can I see this photo?" And I'm just like, this is how I'm like so badly because of my exhaustion and
Mm-hmm.
everything. I wanted to be very passive aggressive. And I'm just like, Kara, take a step back. Don't
Mm-hmm.
think with your immediate response. Take a moment to think about how you can kindly respond because she doesn't know what you've been communicating. And
Yeah.
so basically, I just said, "Hey, I'd love to include that photo. Typically, I send a sneak peek. At this time, I'd be happy to include you in the sneak peek email. You can expect it by this date."
Yeah.
And so basically that's how it's gone.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people are like, I'm so sick of text messages. And this is me going on a tangent of communication. And I don't know if we were planning
No,
on
go
going this
for
way,
it. Do it.
but a lot of times there are people who work with client-based individuals and they're really frustrated because they're sick of people either messaging them on Instagram or messaging them on their phone. And I'm like one that like, bring me my popcorn, let me sit on a forum and go through and answer all these questions. It's just one of my favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, well, did you communicate your preferred method of communication?
That's so
Like,
good. Yeah,
and
that's so
are
good.
you creating that boundary for yourself? Because if you're communicating back the way they're
Mhm.
communicating and that's not how you want to be communicated, then you're just enabling it. So I just say, yep, I'll email you that and just cut all communication from that one particular thing and go straight to email if that's your thing. Now, I will say as a photographer, there's one exception to this rule is if you have like a high schooler,
Mhm.
because for some reason, I don't know if this is how things are going to be for our future or if this is how just this age group is. They don't ever check their email. They don't
No,
care about email.
no.
Those are when I make an exception. But anything that is gallery related or anything to deal with communication, I will say, yep, I emailed that to you. You can log in, blah, 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 blah. But I'll
Yeah,
get like, hey, can you send me my password? And that's when I'm like, yep, I'll email it to you. Like, just
yeah.
say where you're going to go do that at. That's what's really important to change how you want the communication to go. So,
Yeah, that's so smart because I know I've gotten into the trap of like, even I find that giving clients my personal phone number too early in the process
mhm,
is a problem because then they feel like, oh, they can message me at any point. And so
mhm.
then, and this is the other thing is I'm really bad about if a client messages me at 7 o'clock at night, I will message them back. And I don't need to do that. And I've tried to
7.
stop.
I'm
I
like,
know.
that's 10 o'clock for me.
But
I'm
like,
like,
I
"Ah,
try
crap."
to set those boundaries of like, okay, look, I will respond to this tomorrow morning, but then I'm like, well, I'm going to forget about it because that's how my brain works. And so it's better just to do it now. But I do think having those boundaries in place, or like you said, saying, hey, can you send this to me in an email so that I can make sure it's one of the first things I
Yeah.
respond to tomorrow? That is really, and I need to get better about doing that as well. But I like that idea of let them know ahead of time what your preferred communication
Mm,
is. And I
yep.
know this happens, like I was just filling out forms for my daughter's dentist appointment and they had a box where it was like, what's the best way for us to reach you? And they were like, is it email, text, or phone call? And I'm always like, email. I don't want you calling or texting me, email me.
Right?
I was like, I don't need that in my life. But even little things like that, maybe if you don't have a preference, but your clients have a preference, or maybe like you email them and you don't hear back for a week and you're frustrated because you need a response, but they don't ever check their email. Like you said, if they had told you ahead of time, I do better with text messages, then, take that into account. So it goes both ways, like us setting boundaries for how we are communicated with, but also our clients have their own personal ways of wanting to be communicated with too as well. So yeah,
and
it's a lot.
that is key. And when I ask my clients, and when they say like, I don't do email a lot, and usually it's like I've had a lot of couples where they're like, I only use my work email. Where that's where I'm like, okay, I know they're on their honeymoon. I'm going to give them a sneak peek. Not that I would ask them any work related anything while they're on their honeymoon, but I'm going to text them real quick and be like, hey, I just sent you a sneak peek. Enjoy your honeymoon. Like I don't expect them to respond by any way, but I know they're not checking their work email either.
Yes,
so I'm
exactly.
just like, they will go in there just to find that. And I think that's key to like let people know. And if you need an immediate response, sometimes you have to resort to texting, but that's an exception for sure.
I agree. I agree. Well, this has been super insightful and helpful, and I appreciate your time. I appreciate all of your expertise. So tell everybody if they want to learn more about you or what you do or anything you offer, how they can find you or get a hold of you.
Yeah. So I have 2 funnels. I have my photography and I also have my podcast, which Kendra has been a guest on as well. So you can catch her episode on there. So you can find me and my photography at karahainesphotography.com or at Kara Haines Photography on Instagram. Otherwise, you can find the podcast at karahainesphotography.com/podcast, or you can find TikTok and Instagram at Cameras and Coffee Podcast. So,
yes. I know. I loved being a part of your show. Thank you so much for having me on as well.
Oh, yes. It was fun.
Well, thanks so much for being here. I will have all of those links down in the show notes for anyone that wants to go and click on those and grab those and get in touch with you. Make sure you reach out to her and tell Kara that you heard her here on the Girl Means Business podcast. So thank you so much. And we will chat with you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode. Don't forget to leave a review and follow us on socials at Girl Means Business. See you next week.